What is going on, everybody? Today, I'm doing maybe the most controversial video I've ever done on this channel, but also highly requested. The amount of emails, comments, DMs on my Instagram about this particular artist is pretty insane. Hey, real quick, before I jump into this video, if you're interested in private guitar instruction with yours truly online, my email is in the link in the description below. Just shoot me an email, state your case, and I will get back to you. Also, don't forget to sign up for my free monthly newsletter, free written guitar lesson every month, as well as access to all of my tabs. Link in the description and pinned comment as well. Back to the video. Ironically, at the time of this video, their name is also in the news headlines, even bigger than just music headlines. What artist am I talking about? Well, that would be the notorious, one and only Kiss. As much as people usually get very excited to talk about this band, in my personal opinion, this is maybe my least favorite band in the existence of all rock and roll music to this day. There is not a band that I have stronger disdain more than Kiss. And to their credit, I want to start this video by giving them a couple outs just straight off the gate. They might also be the most recognizable band of all time, just for the sheer fact of the gimmick that they have invented. Also to their credit, but my lack of understanding, because I cannot fathom why this is, but many of my favorite musicians, specifically favorite guitar players, were huge fans of this band. That being Eddie Van Halen and Dimebag Darrell, literally getting buried in a Kiss casket because of how much him and his brother loved the band Kiss. I cannot wrap my head around this, and I don't understand it. I'm not going to argue with that fact that some of my favorite musicians love this band, but I can argue with quite a few things. Before I get into my argument, I will also mention that Eddie Van Halen, from my understanding and some rumors that went around, he actually tried to join Kiss in between David Lee Roth leaving the band, Van Halen, and Sammy Hagar joining and it becoming Van Hagar. My understanding is that Eddie Van Halen did try to actually join Kiss at one point, but was essentially denied by Gene Simmons because he was too talented. Not my words, but allegedly their words. So let's talk about this alleged lack of talent in the band Kiss. Are they actually not talented? I would actually say that is not true. I think Kiss might be one of the most talented bands that has ever walked the face of the planet, but not on a musical level. If you really want to call it spade to spade, Kiss has pretty much influenced every single artist that we all listen to. One of my all-time favorite bands, if not my favorite band, is Van Halen with David Lee Roth. To say that they were not influenced by Kiss would pretty much be a made-up statement, because I think it's very pretty much right off the gate valid that Van Halen, essentially being the beginning of glam metal, was heavily influenced by the image of Kiss. That while maybe their music, they were not talented, they happened to be marketing geniuses. Now, let's actually break apart the band for a second. I want to give Ace Frehley some credit. I've actually taught Kiss songs to many students. And frankly, I don't mind the guitar work. I mean, is it my favorite? No, it's not Yngwie Malmsteen, but does it have something worthwhile in it? Yeah. It's just not my favorite stuff. With all that being said, I think Ace Frehley deserves a little bit of respect from the guitar community, because he might be the only one in the band that I actually think has musical talent, guitar player to guitar player. Now, I think everybody kind of recognizes the change of this band from the time that he left the band. They're not cranking out the same hits any longer. So let's actually take this back to bare basics and talk about Kiss, the corporation. Once starting out as a band, and truthfully, the reason why I'm not going to completely slander all their music is because I disdain them so much. I have not listened to any of their catalogs in its entirety. I really just know the hits off the top.
So I can't throw too much shade to this band because I don't know enough of their material. But I will say, from the material that I have heard, I strongly dislike it. But I understand why other people like it. So Kiss, in a sense, is really the first glam band to ever exist. They're the first band that essentially wore scary makeup at a time where this was a very unpopular thing to do. And, wrote pop songs with it, right? They didn't write scary sounding music. They just looked kind of scary to everybody's parents at the time. Now, a lot of people could say, well, Ozzy's really kind of the first guy, Alice Cooper even, to put on makeup and get out there and actually be scary and also kind of make scary music. If you look at the first Black Sabbath album cover, it is cutting edge even to this day. Even I can admit that, being a fan of a lot of death metal bands, that the first Black Sabbath album kind of looks insane. And if I would have seen that, trying to imagine myself living at a time where albums did not look like that, I would probably not let my kid buy it. And that's probably the same with Alice Cooper's first album. While he looked scary, his music kind of sounded scary at the time. Now, obviously, we have scarier music now, but trying to put myself in that position, I can kind of understand why there was some backlash at the time, but I'm sure it was also pretty awesome to some extent. Now, while liking those bands' music is probably subjective to many, I think they eventually became universally loved by a lot of people. Here comes Kiss, which we could essentially consider to be the second iteration of this style of imagery and music. But I really feel like the thing that separated Kiss from Black Sabbath and Alice Cooper is the fact that they wrote pop music, essentially, at the time. Their songs are so basic that some of them quite literally only have 3 chords in them. Now, my personal belief, and probably backed up to some extent by Gene Simmons, is that Kiss knew what they were doing from day one. I'm pretty sure they probably all had a conversation thinking, hey, this ain't really that good, so we got to do something to really stand out from the crowd. Here comes the glam metal phase. Now, while Alice Cooper and Ozzy had more of a subtle look to them that was kind of scary, you know, a little bit of eyeshadow here, some painted nails, maybe a nice little top hat. Ozzy liked to dunk water on himself on stage a lot of the time. Kiss decided to go hard or go home. While I think universally a lot of people would agree with me that their music really wasn't that good and that they really did lack good musicianship to the extent that even their production kind of sounds like doo-doo, I think their image was so impactful that it actually ruined music forever. Now, why do I say that it ruined music? Well, let's look at a time before Kiss. We have some amazing music that I personally am quite biased towards. The Beatles, Simon and Garfunkel, Jimi Hendrix, Janis Joplin, The Doors, Pink Floyd's early albums are coming out at this time. This is also before MTV, Led Zeppelin. Can't forget about Led Zeppelin. Who can argue with this list? Okay? So, what do these bands have in common? Well, no one cares what you look like because you're really not on TV that much. A lot of people at the time of this would have sometimes bought a record and never even known what their favorite band looks like until actually seeing a picture of them in the vinyl. Sometimes you don't even get that much. I heard plenty of stories from fans from back in the day that had never even seen what their favorite band looked like until they bought tickets to a concert and attended that said concert. So Kiss is really a breakthrough moment for rock and roll image, and not just in the rock and roll genre, but what would eventually just become pop star image, pop stardom. Then comes the birth of MTV. All of a sudden, all your favorite bands are on TV. But what comes with that? Well, unfortunately, here's the negative aspect of this. Now, record labels are just signing bands based on what they look like. Now, I wish I could say that this was just a time capsule, you know, from the 80s that only lasted into the 80s, but unfortunately, this time capsule has lived on even until now, permanently affecting the music industry in its current state. Now, you can't even be in a band unless you look a certain way. Now, I've discussed this on my Industry Plant podcast that I did with my former manager, David. We literally discussed how we almost kicked our bass player out of the band because of what he looked like. Had nothing to do with his musical talent, okay? And I have to say that that guy was actually a very incredible bass player. We loved his bass playing, but every single time that we would get to a point of kind of no return with either a major producer or maybe even a label kind of starting to have some interest, they would always look at our bass player and say, yeah, but if we do this, you got to get a new one. So, in a sense, I feel like Kiss ruined music forever by starting this image-based music. Now, Kiss is in a different position because it's very subjective if their music is actually good or not. And truthfully, like I said, I have not even listened to a full album of Kiss. I really only know the hits because I really just don't like it. I don't even like the hits enough to go listen to the whole album, if I'm being real. I think I've heard a couple deep cuts because I got students that like their music, and sometimes I'll end up teaching it. And props to Ace Frehley, right? Because I actually think Ace Frehley's all right. But with that being said, Kiss's music, they had two problems. The music wasn't even good, and they don't even look good, so they had to put on a bunch of makeup. Then later we get out of this Van Halen. Then to the nth degree we get Mötley Crüe. Now this brings me into another point with this because of the lack of talent aspect and the lack of playability. Now it's going to feel like I'm coming at all your favorite bands all at once. Well, I want to say this. I actually like the first two Mötley Crüe albums, so don't come at me for that one. It is not new news to anybody that Nikki Sixx literally doesn't know how to play bass at all. Now, a lot of people say, well, he pretty much knows how to do it now. I mean, he's like 30 years in his career. Well, does he? Because we just got word only a couple years ago from the whole lawsuit with Mick Mars against his former bandmates that allegedly they were all using backing tracks of their own parts live and not even plugged into amps. So what does that mean? Is that just pure imagery, or is that laziness, or is that just a lack of skill and talent? I feel like it's probably somewhere in the middle of laziness and maybe not being able to play their own parts. Mick Mars was the first one, and also, just like Ace Frehley, I actually like Mick Mars. I think he was really the good one in his band, and I think there was some truth to what he was saying about his own music. And of course, we have to look at the facts that he probably was very salty about his band getting rid of him, replacing him with a younger guitar player, John Five, and probably had some former dirt on his bandmates and decided to throw some shade. I'm not going to dispute that. But if we look at kind of the sequence and evolution of artist progression, we just start seeing one thing dominating over the other, and that's image over the music. Now, a lot of people will say, okay, but when Nirvana came out, they got rid of all that. Did they? I don't think they did. I think they actually made it even more watered down. Now, I love Nirvana's music. That's a band that I actually like all their albums and all their songs. I pretty much don't see them having a bad song. But to some extent, their lack of image actually was an image that was heavily capitalized on to the point where you see every single band in the 90s looking and sounding like them, which eventually leads us in to our current state of affairs. Now, I know I skipped over about 20 years there, but it's kind of been all the same to some extent for the last 20 years. Since Nirvana, we could say 30 years at this point. Why do I say that? Well, at this point now, there's niches for every genre, right? Now you could dress up like a crazy band, or you could dress down like Nirvana, and still get a record deal because each image is going to have an audience for that niche. Here's a good example. Black Veil Brides. Very mega popular band when I was in high school. Like literally every single girl loved this band, was in love with every member of the band. They were heavily marketable to young girls. What do they have going for them? Well, To my personal opinion, it was not the music. Otherwise, I'm sure maybe I actually would have liked them, like Mötley Crüe's first two albums, where I actually kind of liked those. But in this case, Black Veil Brides really did not sound good to me, and all they really had going, in my opinion, was their image. The fact that they pretty much dressed exactly like Mötley Crüe, but even more so to that extent. When I was in high school, the amount of girls that I saw hairspraying their hair and amount of goth dudes doing the same thing coming to school was kind of impeccable, because I thought this died with the 80s, but apparently it has lived on. And even now, to some extent, lives on. When I lived in LA, it felt like the 80s had never died. But to some extent, it really hasn't, because those gimmicks and things that have gone in place of the music have forever lived on. Now, of course, in this video, I'm gonna leave it subjective if you like Kiss's music, okay? I know 50% of people are gonna love their music, and I know 50% of people are going to really not like their music like me. I grew up really not being a fan of 80s hair metal. Part of that influence is from my dad, who really hated that music and was only into thrash metal. Literally, my dad would tell me, "This band sucks, put on Metallica." So you could say a lot of my influence on this subject is from my own dad. But to some extent, I think my dad has a point. Being the music critic that he is, he happened to have also raised a music critic himself. If you look at the amount of bands that just got signed off of what they look like versus how their music actually was, sounded, and if they could even actually play it live, is pretty insane. Why are we rewarding bands that cannot play their instruments? And to some extent, I do understand it, because there's also been great music played by people that really can't play. Kurt Cobain is a prime example of this. Talk about someone who really cannot play the guitar, who kinda can't even really sing that well, but wrote great songs. It happens. So there's always exceptions to the rule. But I do feel like before the times of Kiss and before the glam era really took off, that there was actually a lot more substance in music on a wider scale. I'm not saying there isn't any today, but I do believe that there was a lot of substance on a wider scale. And I do believe that that was heavily ruined by a band like Kiss, and to some extent ruined in a even bigger way by the fact that they've done 5 million retirement tours and pretty much are milking the cash cow all the way to the grave. At some point, it's just like, throw in the towel and call it a day. I remember only a couple years ago, if that, they decided Kiss is officially retiring, but we're not really retiring, because we're gonna have holograms now play our music for us, and you can still pay the same prices to see us not even actually there. And of course, now we have this whole debacle where they're getting an award for their musical influence. I'm not here to get into that aspect of things, but I personally wouldn't give them an award for their music. But that has nothing to do with politics. And honestly, award shows don't really matter. I know actually a couple people that vote on the Grammys panel, for artists to get in. It is completely political. Grammys mean absolutely nothing for any genre of music, frankly. It is literally a who you know game. And, so I don't really put any weight on the award thing. But I did see it as a relevant subject, being that Kiss has kind of made headlines recently. And I've had a lot of requests to do a video about them. Well, here's the video. So tell me what you think. Leave it in the comments below. Maybe you hate this video. Maybe not. Maybe it gets love. I don't know. But either way, there's my opinion for you. And with that being said, if you want lessons from yours truly, make sure to send me an email. It's in the link in the description below, as well as the pinned comment. State your case, and I will get back to you. Also, don't forget to sign up for the free monthly newsletter, and I will see you next time.